It is the 21st century. There are too many video games. But out there, it's waiting. The best video game you've never played.
Hello and welcome to The Best Video Game You Have Never Played, the podcast where I, stand-up and improv comedian Lewis Dunn, invite guests on to bring on a video game that I have never played, I then play it, and then we have a discussion about whether or not it is the best video game I have never played. This week's guest is Tom Crowley. You might know Tom from a variety of different podcasts, including Wooden Overcoats, the Beef and Dairy Network podcast, Victoriosity, or indeed his own one-man sketch show, Crowley Time, which is a fantastically hilarious show. You can find it all over the place. I highly recommend listening to it. There's sketches in there about all different kinds of topics, including video games. There's a rather hilarious sketch in which Tom and Mario have a discussion about the nature of failure. But there'll be no such failure on today's episode of the show because Tom has brought on a fantastic cult classic video game that has been on my radar for years and that I was delighted to finally be given an excuse to play. So let's find out how Tom Crowley got on with the best video game you've never played. Hello, Tom. How are you doing?
I'm very well. Hello, Lewis. Thank you for having me.
Not at all. It's very good to have you here. I'm very glad to have pulled you away from your other podcast to get you to come over here.
Multiple podcasts, always as many as I can cram into the schedule.
It's good because we are all, of course, inside the big podcast shed where all podcasts are made. So I've just managed to get you over from one corner.
Oh, that's right. I mean, I've seen you round a lot. You know, said hi in the mornings when we come in to work at our various chained to our copies of digital audio workstations. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely, yes. But Tom, it's great to have you here, and it's great to have you here because you have brought on something, a game that has lingered in the background of my life for quite some time. And I should tell the listener, with the process of getting people onto this show, I go to them and I pitch them the idea and I say, tell me a game that you want to bring on. And there's usually quite a long exchange of games where I try and figure out something that's a good area. This was the first game you came to me with. Straight away, bang, number one. And I went, yep, I haven't played that. I want to play it and I'm interested. So Tom, can you please tell the listener what game it is that you've brought along?
I have brought along Full Throttle, the LucasArts point-and-click adventure game. Chief designed, is that a term in games? Lead designed, whatever you call it, by Tim Schaeffer, who people may know from Grim Fandango, Psychonauts, and Psychonauts 2, which I believe released even possibly today as we're recording this. But anyway, so he's back in the news lately. But Full Throttle is fantastic. It is a sort of barnstorming biker, dystopian future / alternate present road trip adventure where Ben Throttle, who's the leader of a gang of kind of noble outlaws called the Polecats in this sort of American Midwest desert world, they're one of a bunch of rival biker gangs. They seem to be, I guess, one of the nicer ones as far as that goes. But, as far as nice as a biker gang can be. But he finds out, he's approached by the sort of chief executive officer of the motorcycle brand that they all love, Crowley Motors, bearing some resemblance to Harley Davidson, I believe. And so the founder and creator of Crowley Motors wants to ride up to the shareholders meeting with a gang of real-life bikers to show his authenticity. But they don't know that this whole stunt with the biker gang and, in fact, the arrival at the shareholders meeting is a stunt by this chief executive officer or CFO, whatever. I don't know what his title in the corporate structure is. But Adrian Ripberger.
Second from top.
That's right, second from his right-hand man, who he seems to despise and not trust at all, so it's a bit of a wonder how he stayed in that role so long. Anyway, Adrian Ripberger, the horrible corporate shill, kind of 80s-styled executive business type, he's planning to not only ambush and kill Ben's biker gang, the Polecats, but also kill Crowley, the founder of the entire operation, in order to take over in the most hostile takeover imaginable. So you wake up in a bin, which you have to, the first thing you do in the game is punch your way out of a bin, and then you have to go and chase down Ripberger and try and put an end to his evil scheme.
So yeah, I mean that is a great, like, you've opened up the pitch pretty strong there, as you said. Like, that is the start of the game as you punch your way out of a bin and you're on your way to take out a CEO. It is a point and click adventure game.
Yes, it is.
And it's from the 90s. Now, I was very lucky, and again, this is a wonderful thing. So I'm a big Tim Schafer fan. I've played basically all of the other games you listed at the start. I have played apart from Psychonauts 2, which I'm really looking forward to playing.
Oh, yeah.
And so, like, and one of my favorite games, like, it's not just that I like Tim Schafer. I like the underrated Tim Schafer. I like the Tim Schafer that other people don't tend to like as much. So I think Brutal Legend is one of my favorite games of that generation of consoles.
I never played Brutal Legend only because I didn't have a console at that time in history, and I was because I think that was around the time. Yeah, I would have just been off to university, and I was poncing around doing, same as you, Lewis. We were a pair of ponces, poncing around the York University campus, doing drama and comedy and everything. So, my downtime was spent either, rehearsing or also, maybe writing things, preparing for shows and things. So I wasn't playing many games at that time, and I was very, very jealous of my friends who'd already either graduated university or were not using their time profitably, who got to play it. But it looked fantastic. It's one I'm really keen to revisit at some point. But, of course, just at this moment, I can see the shiny bauble of Psychonauts 2 glinting at me with its beautiful high-res cartoon graphics, and that may take priority for me.
Well, this is the thing. I think that this is the thing. Tim Schafer is someone who has a reputation for making brilliant, unique, funny, original games.
Yeah.
And that hasn't gone anywhere. He is still doing that, and he's still doing that very successfully. Like, for all of the faults that one can level against Double Fine in terms of actually making a game on time and on budget, they do.
Nobody does that. The only problem was that they got the fans to fund it, so they
did, yeah. But they did make it, and they don't tend to compromise on their vision, at least when it comes to, like, the initial stages of describing what they want.
No, they're not a sort of Peter Molyneux who says, oh, in the game I'm developing now, you'll be able to actually put your foot through the TV and then go inside the game. And in there you'll be able to marry a beautiful blue alien woman and then father a dynasty of children. And 1 second in real time is 1,000,000 years in the game world. So you're actually multiplying your lifespan by 20 million years, and it comes out and, it's a third-person action adventure. It's not promising on that level, I think. Yeah, Double Fine have... Well, what I imagine we might get into this later in in this episode, but I mean, I could speak for hours about how much I love LucasArts adventure games, and particularly that sort of very Tim Schafer. And it is a sort of, for a company that worked with a lot of sort of game designers and game writers, Tim Schafer projects are quite distinctive, whether he did them with Dave Grossman or just as a writer contributing to the game, or if it was his whole shebang. Like, they're so... I love them so much. They bring so much just inherent instant joy to me, and I think it's all traced back to I used to be an avid reader of PC Gamer magazine. In fact, when my parents moved, I had to throw all of my old copies away in one of the biggest wrenches in my life. And the cover disc had a demo for Grim Fandango back in 1998, and I played the demo, and it was one of those moments where you go, oh, I didn't know games could be like this. I didn't know they could be this well written. I didn't know they could look this cool. Admittedly, the graphics have dated slightly, but you can get the remastered version. You won't notice as much. But it was that whole... but not even looking cool in terms of, like, oh my God, there's anti-aliasing on the bump map or whatever. But just looking cool as in the characters were well designed in the way that they are in animated movies. And they're cartooned, and they're striking and interesting. And the writing is funny, but not like video game funny, like actually funny. And and the fact that I will probably get into a lot of this later in the episode, but that whole... I was just saying this to my partner earlier, actually. I was saying to her that to me, that sort of 1989 to 1999, probably, era of LucasArts was... The stuff they made was like Pixar to me. And in a weird way, they bear some resemblance to Pixar because they had the big corporate money. They had George Lucas and Steven Spielberg behind them. And seemingly not, for a long time, not the most pressure on them to make commercially successful stuff. Like, they had the Star Wars tie-ins, which always generated money. But at the same time, the same developers, some of the same developers, were working on these zany, funny, really eccentric adventure games that were, the definition of cult success. Like, in looking up a bit of information about Full Throttle, I found out it was the first Lucasfilm Games or LucasArts adventure game, point-and-click adventure game, ever to sell 1 million units. And
yes, and that is something that's very interesting to me, because I don't know about you, but my understanding of Full Throttle in the cultural zeitgeist is that, there was this batch of LucasArts games that came out, a lot of which have now become sort of like engraved video game canon. You've got things like The Secret of Monkey Island, Day of the Tentacle, Grim Fandango. These are games that like have lodged themselves into the cultural zeitgeist of video games. And Full Throttle kind of hasn't. Or at least not to the same degree.
No, it is the cultier one, and it's hard to say why. I think oddly, Grim Fandango, which I believe was quite the flop at the time. Although who knows? I'd be fascinated to know how the sales figures are now that they've remastered and re-released these for like every system in the world. So I'd be fascinated to know how those actually sell. But that might be information that Double Fine deliberately wants to keep very secret. I don't know. But it is...
Well, they're owned by Microsoft now, so we will never know how much any game they've ever sold again, because everything they make's just being released on... I mean, I played this on PC Game Pass. Thank goodness. Like, that was another great thing that you came to me, is it's like, do you have Full Throttle? And I'm like, yes, apparently I do.
I have Full Throttle and every other game in existence. It's an interesting thing.
And this was the last one to get remastered. Like, the priority list for these games as they got remastered was The Secret of Monkey Island got remastered. I got that when it came out, the remaster. Loved it. Played it on the Xbox. Had a great time. Then it was, I think, Day of the Tentacle. Then Grim Fandango. They jumped Full Throttle. They had to go back to Full Throttle. And it was the last one to get made. And I think there's something about Full Throttle. I expected when I went to look at the sales that it was going to be Full Throttle was not a commercial success and sort of heralded the decline of the adventure game as a cultural phenomenon in video games. But it wasn't. It was, they predicted 100,000 sales. They got 1 million, and then it just fumes, just nothing. I don't understand what happened where they go from Full Throttle, a game that by any standards of video games in the 90s sold really incredibly well, to Full Throttle is the last game that people are remastering out of a collection of legendarily well-received video games.
If only we could touch the hem of Tim Schafer's robe and ask him this one question. So my only answer can be based on speculation, but two things sort of occur, which is, well, this isn't true. I was going to say 1995, you're getting into the sort of mega popularity of home video game consoles. Did the Nintendo 64 launch in 95? Maybe in America, but not in the UK.
Ooh. I think the Nintendo 64 is 96, actually.
96,
I'm going to quickly check that.
The fact-checking time, looking up the facts for the podcast. Don't lie to your listeners.
It is 96. It came out in Japan in 96. Yeah.
But I just wondered if, because PC gaming certainly, because I didn't have games consoles as a kid. I wasn't allowed them, in fact. My mum was a little bit technophobic in that way. But of course, what I did is what every other kid who wasn't allowed a console did, which is immediately work out how to get games working on my PC. So it definitely felt at the time like, I mean, PlayStation was just around the corner, which was video games breaking forcefully, with their grey iron foreheads, straight into the mainstream. And I wonder if there is a bit of a lost generation of PC games where they weren't getting the same attention in the same way, or maybe you have something like Full Throttle, which is very, very popular. I mean, also, to put it in perspective, 1 million units is chicken feed by a lot of today's games standards. And but at the same time, it's sizable impact. And we have that direct comparison with Monkey Island and things. I maybe wonder if it might be a generational thing where that pocket of Sam and Max Hit the Road, Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis, Monkey Island 2, sort of hit at just the right time when adventure games seemed to sort of have their heyday. So while fewer people bought them, it was that diehard, core of fans who really worshipped and adored them and remembered them. And maybe Full Throttle came slightly too late, but this is all just speculation.
This is the thing. I have a different theory as to why Full Throttle was the last to be remastered. The last to the game that out of that batch of games is sort of said and Full Throttle. It's the last in the list. And I think it is, and I'm really sorry to say this, Tom, It is, because it's probably not the best one in that batch.
You're wrong, Lewis. It's the best video game you've never played.
Well, look, here's the thing. So, I was really glad when you came to me with this, because it's been on my to-do list, Full Throttle. And the fact that it was in the PC Game Pass, and I'm like, great, I've got the excuse, I've got the copy, I don't have any reason to not play it. I was very excited to pick up. I also knew that famously Full Throttle is quite a short game, and it is quite a short game. It's about 6 hours long. And that's 6 hours, brackets, providing you don't know how to finish it, because like every point-and-click adventure game, as soon as you know the solution to every puzzle, the game evaporates.
The Let's Play I found of it, to check back for reference, was 2 hours, start to end.
Yes. And I bet as well, like in that 2 hours, it's just the case of they've completely streamlined the internet. They know exactly which item goes where, they know where to go next, they know exactly where to go next. And so I thought to myself, look, it's 6 hours even if I don't know what I'm doing. So for the most part, what I'm going to do is what I've done with every point-and-click adventure game I've replayed. Because I've also done the remasters of Day of the Tentacle, Secret of Monkey Island, Grim Fandango. And I set myself the rule, which was, where possible, use the in-game hint system that they added, if I don't know what to do. And then when that fails, then I can go look at a guide. So with Full Throttle, I went, okay, I'm only going to look at a guide when I don't know what to do and I'm getting frustrated. Because there's no point just running around clicking everything and getting upset, because that's not what the game is actually about.
You could get the Panini strategy guide and learn what the solution to the puzzle is at your local branch of Virgin Megastore.
Yes, yeah. Also, there was a thing in the past where you would call up a... I never did this myself, and thank goodness, where you could call up a phone line.
Yeah.
Like, oh my goodness, could you imagine a more infuriating process than just clicking through every possible option to go,
God.
I'm stuck on that puzzle, and then hanging up.
Where's the documentary about the running and operating of the LucasArts secret hint line? Because I'd love to watch that.
You found a podcast series there, the running of the LucasArts helpline.
Dibs.
But this is the thing. So that was the thing I set myself. And I went, okay, where possible, I'm going to try and play this game as straight as possible. And then over time, devolve down to the guide. Every single time I devolved down to the guide in this game, it was because there was a location that existed that I didn't know was in the game. Yeah. That I had to go back on myself, or I had to click in a very specific area that suddenly revealed that it was a door, or that there was there are multiple cutscenes in this game where like you're on a motorbike, unsurprisingly.
Yep.
And you charge away from something that explodes, or some sort of crash, or some people are after you. And then you find out the solution to a puzzle is to head back into the danger you just escaped.
Yeah, which is somewhat alienating. Again, I think that is something weirdly where in the old school, pre widely available internet era, that would be something you'd discover by just hovering your mouse over everything you could find until you realized that there was an arrow saying, "Oh, I can go back to where those guys just shot me." It's a funny one. And also, I think maybe in terms of puzzles, something that winds people up about this game is there are quite a few sort of time-sensitive things, or at least there are sort of domino effect puzzles where you do something, you notice that touching the ladder up to the gas tower triggers the police arriving, then you flee. And my adventure game brain goes, oh, I must have to disable the alarm. But it isn't that. Yeah. And I think, weirdly, one reason for this is... Well, I think this is true. I can't attribute this quote, so this may be apocryphal. But I believe Tim Schaeffer in Ben Throttle, and in the sort of the setting of, a kind of slightly Mad Max-esque post-apocalyptic biker world, wanted to sort of get away from the lovable, goofy, naif of Guybrush Threepwood or like Bernard Bernoulli, like lovable, frail idiots that define like King's Quest and Space Quest and every adventure game, and wanted to give you this rough, tough, like action hero. And so suddenly things like driving back towards the explosion you've just escaped from, and not taking the sneaky way around a problem is in character. But the only problem is that approach, that sort of slightly more sly approach to puzzles, people had their brains programmed by hundreds of games to think of puzzles in that way. So I can see how that would be. And hey, at least it extends the runtime artificially. But
this is the thing. This is sort of where. So the thing about Full Throttle is you mentioned that you punch your way out of a bin at the start, and the reason for that is because the way you interact with this game is that you can click on things, and then a little menu pops up, and you can interact with your eyes, your tongue, your fist, or your feet.
Yes.
And it's kind of cool. It's kind of it's a sort of simplification of that like use, item, look at, talk to system that all these games.
Yeah.
which was, and that is great. It's a streamlined system. And then I start to think about two of those. Two of those are punch and kick.
Yep.
And I go, okay, you pick things up and then you punch things, you kick things. But punch and kick are actually pretty common things to do in a video game, punching and kicking.
Yep.
Except they're not normally something you would do in a point-and-click adventure game necessarily.
No,
and
indeed.
Then there's sections where you ride on a motorcycle and you have to get in a fight on a motorcycle, and it's famously terrible. I don't want to harp on too much about it. But they're really bad. They are in fact so bad that the remaster lets you just fully skip them.
Yeah.
Which I think is a sign that sort of they knew they were reaching there. But that again to me indicates that, oh, hang on. The problem with Full Throttle is not the setting or the characters or anything like that. It's that it's in the wrong genre. It's actually, Full Throttle shouldn't be a point-and-click adventure game. Full Throttle should be a third-person action game.
Well, I would almost agree with that, except I think that, as you've pointed out, the action sequences are the worst bit, and the puzzles are the best bit, and like the conversations you have with people. And I think that one thing actually that really impressed me about revisiting it now is, again, not in the bike action sequences, although there is one caveat to that, which I'll talk about in a second, but one of the best things about it is that sort of, whereas, again, like I say, you have to train yourself out of taking that sly, distract the person, diffuse the alarm way of looking at puzzles. The other thing is that there's such a physical reality to the world of Full Throttle. Like, again, like punching a lid off a bin, kicking someone's door down. There's a very visceral and it's in the animation, it's in the way the puzzles are designed as well. Like and the sort of grit of the art all over the place. There is something very... It's an action movie, but it's an action movie told through a point-and-click adventure, and I would say very effectively. The only issue being, adventure game engines are not very good at handling physical, like, what would you say, rapid reaction action, like the fights on the bikes. And my one exception to that is that one thing I did like about the bike fights was that in the main sequence... the mine road, where you're challenging, in a long chain, you're challenging multiple other sort of bike gangs to fights. There is a puzzle.
It's a semi-random order as well, so you can't request who you're going to fight.
No,
meaning that you have to just constantly cycle through a series of fights until, as you're about to say, you get to the right person.
That's right. Yeah, you need a specific thing, and also you need a specific tool to beat them with. And I think there's something fun about that. Like you need a plank. It's like the house that Jack built. You need the plank to smack the cave fish in the face. But to get the to get the plank you have to attack the vulture with the and it's all these things with a chain, because he'll be too quick otherwise. And it's like it is all like it operates in the same puzzle logic. And weirdly, you almost wish that if the action on the bikes was automated. If Ben would always win, you just had to sort of... Maybe it should be Brutal Legend. Maybe it should be a real-time strategy game.
Well, this is the thing. You could absolutely do that sequence on the bikes and make it good. There's an idea there that's fun in terms of you're fighting on the bikes to get different items of different people, and different items are better against different folk. It's just that they've had to make it work in a point-and-click adventure game.
Yeah.
Which is the wrong genre.
I think it is... No, that's true. But I think also it accounts for so little of the gameplay time, although the mine road sequence is quite long. The rest of it, it's only some very halting interactions with that action thing. And I think also the other thing is, it would be so much harder to make this story in a sort of third-person action game that you would care about as much. Because...
But I don't think that's true. I just think
Make your case.
Well, so you pitched it to me as an action film.
Yeah.
This game's pace is constantly destroyed by the fact it's a point-and-click adventure game.
Now, see, I don't agree about that. I think what I like about it is that it's quite a deft way of trying to tell an action story in a point-and-click game, because I was thinking a lot about how tough it is. And bearing in mind as well, when they made this game, point-and-click adventures and their format and their structure was such an established system. You knew that there was a screen, and on that screen there were lots of things you could click. And if you left that screen, there'd be another screen, and you sort of find your way from bits of the world to the next bit of the world, looking for people to talk to, items to pick up. And so you need to have a sort of staggered story where you can have these heightened moments of like triumph and action and feel like you're that little bit closer. But then you also need to be able to put the brakes on, no pun intended, completely. It wasn't a pun, it was just an appropriate visual image. But, There's no praise for that. And then be able to take the time, which, to me, to a nerd for these types of games, the bread and butter is when you reach the sort of intriguing, beautiful, otherworldly space, the next world screen to look at, with the next set of funny and interesting characters to talk to. And so you need to be able to sort of let's go fully into the biker metaphor. You need to be able to hit the throttle and then blast through an exciting moment that makes you feel like everything you've just done, all this sort of slow procedural working stuff out, was worth it, and then find a reason to slow things back down again so that you can then solve the next set of puzzles in order to kick things off. Except in Full Throttle, in the last kind of half hour, it is just a blast. Like, you go through all of these exciting set pieces. There's a few mini games and there's a couple of slightly longer puzzle sections, but they're all quite short. Like, there'll be 1 or 2 puzzles to solve, because it's almost like they know we're reaching the end now. People aren't going to want to stop in another town and meet another 7 exciting characters. We've met everyone we want. We know the stakes of the story. We've had all the intrigue. We've uncovered all the mysteries. Let's have guns firing, explosions going off, stadiums burning down. And between each of those little moments, you'll have these few quite sort of nicely staged moments where the solution is always going to be, even if it's an action kicking or punching solution, there'll always be a kind of very physical puzzle-solving element to it. There's a section where you're stuck on the front of a truck that the bad guy's driving, and if you go too far up the top, and I love this section. If you go too far over the top,
I hated this section so much.
Well,
this was my least favourite part of the game by a long shot. As
the format of the show states, you're wrong. I think those bits are so cool, and absolutely. The problem is that whereas you'd have a quick time event in a game today, in those days, they stick to their guns and they go, no, this is a point and click adventure. You are solving puzzles, so you are solving the puzzle of how do I climb over the truck cabin when that guy's going to shoot me if I show my face.
Yes, but what they also then do is, in the point-and-click genre, point-and-click as a genre basically works under the premise of curiosity is rewarded.
Yes.
Ultimately, there's a point I'm going to make later about puzzle design, but we'll get around to that. But largely, my problem with this section is that it's timed. So you have to figure out the solution under a time limit. You don't know what the time limit is. It doesn't tell you how long you've got left or how long you're going to do this whole thing for. But crucially, if you fail, the punishment for failure is that you then have to watch the cutscene that leads up to it, which is about 2 minutes long.
Yeah, it's a long one.
All over again.
Yeah, that's a shame.
And it's it's hair-pullingly frustrating, because I agree, I want to be on board with the idea of this is an exciting finale section. I've got to get this right. I've got to, I'm engaged in the moment. And you're right, they're sticking to point-and-click adventure puzzles. The solution to this section isn't action-based, it is puzzle-based. You have to use items that you have found and interactions in the world to sort things out. And it's good, okay, I'm fine with that being the finale. Why have you put this deliberately slow genre of game under a time limit?
Well, I think time limits are difficult. I think it would be a better solution just to have you on an infinitely scrolling stretch of highway, and in theory you could go make a cup of tea and come back and they still wouldn't have driven off the cliff. But I think,
at the very least tell me how much time I've got left, or at the very least go, oh, that didn't work, and flash back to the start of the sequence. Don't make me...
Yeah, Prince of Persia style, that'd be a good idea.
And they kind of do that, because it cuts to black and then he goes, oh, that didn't work, let me try again. And I'm like, okay, and then I have to watch the whole cutscene again, and I'm like, this is the remaster as well. I'm like, this was a chance at redemption. You could have fixed this. You could have made this work.
Unskippable cutscenes, I don't think are something that anyone has ever liked. Nobody.
That's true.
If you said, oh, you have the option to skip the cutscenes in the Full Throttle remaster, I don't think anybody would go, well, you've just ruined the entire thing. Nobody would even have an issue with that, surely.
I don't mind the idea that you can't skip them the first time. I don't mind them being like, no, you have to watch the cutscene or it doesn't make any sense. Which, to be fair, in Full Throttle, you have to watch the cutscenes.
Why you wouldn't want to as well in a game that's totally predicated on story, I don't know. But it would be nice if you have to rerun the truck action sequence over and over again. I don't know. I think it's such a strange thing if you go back and play many games from... I mean, when did it begin? Are we talking sort of 2005 maybe, when it became accepted that people don't want to have to watch the entire cutscene leading up to the boss fight?
Oh my goodness!
People will always remember the cutscene that precedes the most unreasonably difficult boss fight in a game because they had to watch it 400 times and they hated it more each time.
And largely that exists because the cutscene was a way to disguise the fact the game was loading.
That's true. Yeah, in some cases. But I mean, as you say, if you're remastering a game, or you've got a game which isn't taking up to, well, if let's say a loading screen, unless it's in a PlayStation 1 game or or the Elder Scrolls Morrowind, or similar, it's going to take 20 seconds or something probably. So why a 2-minute cutscene needs to cover it there's no excuse for that.
But the thing, right? So this is something about Full Throttle that as a game. So I think I like point and click adventure games with a massive asterisk, which is that, and it's kind of the same problem I have with a game like Pokemon, which is that I love the world, I love the story, I love interacting in this place and getting to explore it and getting to know it. The actual gameplay is really annoying and really frustrating because there's two types of puzzle that exist in a point and click adventure game, and one of them is like I was trying to explain it as knowing and solving. Mm-hmm. So you solve a puzzle by being given everything that you need to solve it and being told, these are all the things you need, figure it out. That's the best kind of puzzle. The best kind of puzzle in any video game is solve it. Here you go. Here's a Rubik's Cube. Here's a knowable, solvable thing. And then there is knowing how to solve a puzzle, which is the majority of puzzles in point-and-click adventure games, which is, oh, if you put that on that, it does this. And you go, well, I didn't know that. And the point-and-click adventure game goes, well, I knew that. And that's like the whole thing. But there's a couple of puzzles... There's a couple of puzzles in Full Throttle that are solvable, i.e. there's a very good one involving a padlock and a chain, which actually, when you think about it, you go, that's solvable because you can look at all the interactions and figure it out. But it is full of no-type puzzles, where the only way you're going to figure it out is either through sheer brute force or knowing that certain items do certain things. For example, on the mine road, when you were fighting the bikes, there is absolutely no way to know what is going to work until you find the item and just try over and over again. There's no logic. There's no solvability.
I think that's the problem with the mine road for me, is that, because also loving these games as I do, I think there is a certain kind of... I think to approach them with a sort of modern mindset of what is a puzzle game even, you think about games that tend to be... Well, a lot of puzzle games these days are almost more like a sort of Myst type thing, where it's all quite first-person-y, and they're deliberately puzzles. If you look at something like The Witness, there's a story being told, but it's a world constructed solely to serve a certain kind of puzzle solving. Whereas the idea of the graphic adventures was much more to sort of tell the story and to give you these fun possible combinations. And some of the most fun you can have is if you find a particularly funny wrong solution and get the line of dialogue or the visual gag that meets you if you find the uniquely wrong solution to a puzzle. And of course there are, the frustration with it is just hearing Sam, the police dog, go, I can't use these two things together, 100 times as you say, try to brute force the solution. But, I think today the solution to that is guides, of course. But it's also, it's almost a different school of thought of kind of relishing the experimentation and the trial and error of some of these things. Because also often, in some of the better designed puzzles, trying the wrong thing and triggering the line of dialogue, or trying the wrong thing and just kind of, the fact that it doesn't work sets your brain worrying a different way. I do, however, think that, the reason that point-and-click adventures are even more now today a niche pursuit is because that kind of very slow, methodical gameplaying, we're not wowed by the idea that we can meet voice-acted characters who are well-animated now. That's in every single video game. Back then, the idea that you were playing a sort of animated Mad Max film was so exciting. And I remember at the time, I played this game, I think I played this after Grim Fandango, but not that many years later. So still, that kind of very kind of nicely drawn and very well created characters in games was still very novel. So I think it helps a lot that I craved that stuff from games so much that, of course, you make allowances for the occasional time when you go, well, I'm sorry, Full Throttle, I didn't realize that I had to go back and get the hover motor from the car that was pursuing me. There are some times like that where you start to... But then that said, something I was struck again on this time through was how ultimately so many of the puzzles you go, oh, of course. And I think the foremost one of those, as you say, is the is the lock, the padlock on the garage door. And but that said, that was the puzzle which at the time was notorious for being unsolvable and infuriating. And so many people just never saw that way through it.
It's a difficult puzzle, but I think it's a very good example of a solvable puzzle design where when you see it, you go, oh, of course that makes sense. That's a really good idea. That clicks. It's the only puzzle in this game I can think of that has that level of satisfaction to it, because almost every other puzzle in the game was either perfunctory in the sense that it wasn't really a puzzle; it was just like a fairly obvious interaction, or it was like there's an infuriating one where you mentioned it earlier, where you touch a ladder and it summons a police hover car. And the whole point of this section is you're trying to get fuel for your motorcycle. And I went, oh, it's a trick. I'm not trying to get into the fuel tank. They've landed the police car. I can steal fuel from the car.
Yeah.
I've got a hose. I've got a gas can. I'm going to do the trick with the hose and the gas can that everyone knows about, but nobody knows how to actually do.
Yeah.
And I click the hose and I click the police car and he goes, no. And I go, oh. Oh, does it want me to put the hose in the gas can and then do it? Okay, hose in the gas can. No. Oh. I don't know how to solve this then. I thought I had this. I go online. I was completely right. It's just I had to click a very specific part of the police car in order to trigger. And it's like, at what level of pedanticism was that worth making a distinction on?
That's like, you can't level that at Full Throttle and then not level it at Monkey Island and Day of the Tentacle. They all do that. They all do that.
It's a flaw in the genre. It's a flaw in the genre. And it's a flaw in the sort of idea that these puzzles are... I think quite a lot of the time in a puzzle game... Not a puzzle game, sorry, a point-and-click adventure game, particularly the LucasArts point-and-click adventure games, the thing that is making me not able to do the thing I want to do is that the way I interact with this world is not natural. It's not an instinctive, normal way for me to interact in a world. If I was actually, in a LucasArts adventure game, I would just do the thing I thought worked, and then based on what happened, if it did or didn't work, I would go, oh, well, it didn't work, so what do I need to do to solve it? There's so many classic examples of puzzles where you think, oh, I need to take that, and you click on it and it goes, oh, I can't take that. And then you find out the reason he can't take that is because he can't reach. Well, that's the kind of thing I would know if I existed in the world and went, I can't reach that, so I need to figure out a way to reach that. That's the problem with Full Throttle.
Well, I think, but that sort of thing is egregious. But I don't think that specific crime is ever committed in the same way. I think that, speaking about trial and error in the sense of point and click adventure, I think the best example that was ever come up with, I can't remember who specified this one, but in the Discworld point and click game, which starred, I believe it was Eric Idle and Tony Robinson did most of the voices in it. There's a sequence where and this is the most egregious example of this sort of thing. You need to get, a belt buckle from a stall vendor because you need something shiny. I forget why. In the end, the solution to it is to spike the stall owner's prunes with a laxative. Why? I don't know, because prune's already a laxative. And then you have to... he runs into the little dunny, next to his stall and pulls his trousers down, and there is there's the belt buckle. And so you go, great, well, I can get that now. But no, he stops you and sort of kicks your hand away. So you need to distract him while he's eating his spiked prunes and having a giant shit, we can only presume. And the way you do it is to sneak squid pheromones onto him, so that the squid that you've been carrying around, when you put it into the dunny while he's in the cubicle, will try and make love to his face, so that he's distracted enough that you can get the belt buckle. And it's that kind of thing which Full Throttle does shy away from.
That's true.
Some of the solutions, and this is the landscape it came out of. And I think that there is a certain degree of brain training to do when doing kind of across the board with these adventures. It wasn't just the LucasArts ones. In fact, I think famously Sierra were even more esoteric when it came to these things.
Well, famously in Sierra ones, you could die.
Yeah.
So Sierra games were a genre based on curiosity that punished curiosity.
Yeah.
So it's an inherently
exactly.
it's a terrible genre. I don't know if you've ever tried to play the text adventure version of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
I was just thinking about it. No, I haven't tried it properly. I've played the opening sequence and died immediately, like everybody else.
Exactly. there's no video game that's more unhappy with the fact you're trying to play it than the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy text adventure.
Actively trying to put you off, yeah.
But that Discworld, that example you gave of the Discworld, that's a perfect example of everyone. There became a thing in the genre where people became determined that point-and-click adventure games had to be funny.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
And that solution is really funny. It's really funny on paper.
It is funny.
It's just a terrible puzzle because reading it's really funny, but it's funny because it's unexpected and unpredictable. Whereas by the time you figured out you need to put squid pheromones on the man with like unstoppable diarrhea, it's no longer funny because you've been trying to figure this out for ages, and when you finally do it you go, that's absolute bullshit. That makes no sense. And to be fair, Full Throttle, apart from the fact it's a lot of trial and error, no solution in this game was bullshit. No solution in this game was, oh, I need to train a squirrel in order to be able to open a door. Like, it was nothing absurd happens in Full Throttle's puzzles. So you're right in that respect. And I think maybe Day of the Tentacle actually has quite a few of those. When you figure out the solution, it's really funny to read, but it's not at all funny to execute.
Well, it's a long time since I played Day of the Tentacle. I think I have the remastered version as well. But that was one I remember being so stuck. And I think part of the issue with, maybe arguably with Full Throttle as well, but is that there is quite an open world to play with. With Day of the Tentacle, you've essentially, at one point, I think you've got more or less the entire mansion plus 3 time zones. The entire mansion in 3 different time periods to play with. So, when you talk about trial and error, if you get stuck in Day of the Tentacle, you might be trying to solve a puzzle that's come up in the greenhouse of the far future with a piece of wood that you got in Revolutionary era America. There's such a big open world, and there is something quite fun about that in Day of the Tentacle, just because there is so much to interact with and so many fun, beautiful cartoon things to look at. But it is, you have to really warp your mind to, as you say, not think about these in a naturalistic way, but instead think in sort of a strange cartoon logic. You're looking beyond the screen at the developer, like waggling his eyebrows at you.
Exactly.
Or her eyebrows, but if you look at the credits, mostly his.
Mostly him, yeah.
Mostly his, but not exclusively though. But anyway, so you look at the gender non-conforming developer waggling their eyebrows at you, and go, what would that person think is the funniest thing I can do with this, or what is it? What are they trying to stop me noticing? And it is that thing. It's not so much role-playing as the character. It's more going, right, what are they trying to get me to do here? Like, what's the thing that they're either waving in front of me, like so close that it's, the elephant in the room, it's so close that I can't even see it, or what's the thing that they're sort of dangling a little way away from me going, yeah, you're never going to get it, you're never going to get it. And I think there is a fun in that. It's a very different kind of puzzle solving, and like you say, quite often if you just can't hook your brain on the right weird concept, it is just a matter of brute forcing things, or looking up, or putting it in Google these days.
But I think Full Throttle is less guilty of that than other examples like the Discworld example, and I think there are definitely some puzzles in. I think there's definitely some puzzles in Grim Fandango now that I think about it. That when I found out the solution, I was like, "What nonsense is this?" Full Throttle does shy away from that, and it's to be admired for shying away from that. I think they kind of, the simplification of the verb menu down to those 4 basic actions, the fact the inventory, like there's no inventory combining in this game. Every item, you're either using an item on something or you aren't.
Yeah.
And that's sort of like they're starting to figure out that actually these are problems in the genre. These are things that we need to iron out. But as they're doing that, they're slowly basically revealing, the point and click genre doesn't really work. Like, they're basically slowly unraveling the fact that, we're going to add some bike action sequences and a destruction derby, and just so that there's things to do in this game, because the more that we pull away from this obscure puzzle design that nobody really likes, the less game there is.
Well, I think this leads to a couple of things that maybe are an explanation as to why it's not the most fondly remembered. Because I think it stands up great as an example of this type of game on its own. And I think that people like some of the action. I remember quite enjoying the Demolition Derby sequence. It's certainly a lot more of a kind of immediate, recognizable type of action than waggling left and right on a bike in the mine road sequence. But it's I think that there was there was an active attempt to introduce action sequences, because processing power had increased to the point where you could have 3-dimensional action games. Dark Forces, I think, it came out the same year as which is the Star Wars Doom game. came out the same year. So like you could do 3D rendering and you could do full-on twitchy, fast action games. So I think there was a lot of pressure on point-and-click games to include those sorts of action sequences. And also probably within that kind of attempt to make this more accessible was that streamlining down of like, well, no, you can't combine the rubber chicken with a pulley because that's too weird and people don't want to waste their time with that. That's a classic one as well. But I think that is a merit of it. But it was also something which at the time got it criticised for being too easy. Because
I mean, it is a pretty easy game, and I think there is something to us. I doing some research as well. I think that they were kind of right to say, for its time, I can understand why if you bought Full Throttle at whatever price it was sold at in the 90s, and it would have been expensive because video games were a lot more expensive in the past. And then you could beat it in 6 hours. I can see why you'd be really upset and annoyed, particularly because this genre has a reputation for buckle up, you're here for 40 hours rubbing everything on everything.
Yeah. But then again, if that's what people want, then that encourages your Discworld style of puzzle writing, and it makes people artificially try and jack up the difficulty sometimes. And I think that is something that LucasArts generally were less guilty of. I think because they prized the jokes and a little bit more of a purity in the puzzles. I mean, I can't speak for some of their very early ones. I never played Maniac Mansion or Zack McCracken. But,
no, I haven't played those either. I think that there comes a point with the point-and-click adventure genre where it gets so old, you go, no, I don't think I can make this work anymore.
Yeah, it's especially because... So I think that one reason Full Throttle's so good is because it's at a time when, like you say, there's the occasional moment when you go, oh, that didn't work, and you realise, oh, no, I meant to click this on the gas cap, not on the actual car. That sort of thing's frustrating. But imagine that kind of pedantry at a time when there were only about 40 pixels on the screen. Like, I think that's what tends to put me off
but I think
from those earlier ones. But yet, still, Monkey Island is fantastic and still works brilliantly.
Yes, yeah, and I think so. This is the thing as well that I've sort of been treading around this because this is a really subjective thing.
Okay.
So, I love The Secret Monkey Island. I really like the setting. I really like pirates as a genre. I like Day of the Tentacle. It's a really zany, wacky game, and sometimes it's a bit too zany, wacky. But I'm inherently find the idea of an evil purple tentacle deciding it wants to take over the world because it drank some radioactive. Like, that to me is a funny idea, and like the concept of you've got 3 characters across 3 time periods. Grim Fandango is a sort of, I think, in a lot of ways, the pinnacle of the writing that this genre gets to. Like, Grim Fandango is an epic, like it's across multiple time genres, and like the scale of the stories and all this. And I thought I really loved Grim Fandango. Full Throttle definitely has the setting I am least into.
That's totally valid, but I think part of that was an attempt to do a very different point and clicker. And that's, I think a lot of that is why I think that, and the sort of slightly more accessible level of puzzle, is, I think, what makes it stand up on its own 2 feet around the other, longer, more involved, and in some ways, more emotionally investing or funnier, like games like Day of the Tentacle and Grim come to mind immediately. But I think the reason it holds its own is because it has this very specific setting and aesthetic, and that is reflected in the puzzles. Quite often the solution is hit the thing with the crowbar, like Ben the biker would do. Like it feels all very consistent and of its own world. Plus, in a sort of post-apocalyptic type desert landscape, the amount of kind of insane destruction, crashing the front of an airplane off a cliff, feels a lot more tonally correct in that world. And and I think there's also something so beautiful about just the staging of so many of those moments. Again, bearing in mind that doing sort of cutscenes on that scale and animation that was that elaborate was like unheard of on PC games at the time. I was just a bit near the end when the front sort of the sort of Red Dwarf style scoop on the front of this truck, which is a taxiing jumbo jet. The mouth drops open for a pivotal action sequence, and I was going, please let it hit the road and sparks fly up, and it's like, of course they are, it's just the sort of everything is twisted metal and like fast and grimy and full of sand and dirt, and that I absolutely adore about it. So I can't agree with you on the setting. But that said, if all games were like that, if it was like FPSs at the time and everything was brown, and this was another one of those, I might agree with you, because it's not something that I'm immediately as drawn to as cartoon Day of the Tentacle or beautiful noir Grim Fandango.
But the thing I think that's interesting about Full Throttle setting, and you're right, it's consistent writing. I'm not trying to in any way suggest that the setting is like underrepresented or in any way like a bad fit, as it were. Well, I think it is a bad fit for a point-and-click adventure game. I think this should be a third-person action game where you get to ride a motorcycle and punch guys and use weapons against them and still solve puzzles, still use things on things. But like to me, this game is. And it's not necessarily explicitly what happened, but I think you can see the line from Full Throttle to Brutal Legend pretty strongly.
Yeah.
In the sense that, and this is the thing, is that Double Fine exists, and the first game that Double Fine makes is Psychonauts, which is a platformer. And they still maintain it's really funny, it's really well-written characters, it's big, expansive worlds that feel well-lived in. You still have to solve puzzles in unusual and imaginative ways. They didn't lose anything that makes these games good. It's just that they found a way to translate them into a type of game that's actively fun to play rather than frustrating. There's everything that's good about Full Throttle has nothing to do with it being a video game.
Well, to that I would merely say, you're wrong, Lewis. It's the best video game you've never played. But yeah, no, I think I see what you're saying. I think it does come down to personal taste in that respect then as well, because I see what you mean, and I think that definitely, if you, for example, I never finished Broken Age. Again, partly it was like
I didn't finish Broken Age either.
I
backed Broken Age.
Me too.
I was so behind it. I was like, yes, here comes the point and click game, and then I beat I beat the first half of it that they released early, and I went, this is great. And then the second half, they went, people wanted it to be more like a point-and-click adventure game from the 90s, and I immediately got stuck and went, this sucks, I hate it.
There you go. But I mean, I think I may have finished part 1 actually back in the day, but never picked it up again. Not because I didn't really like it. I think it looked beautiful. But, that's them going, right, point-and-click adventures, whoa, they are not in vogue. We need to simplify this right down. And so a lot of those elements... So, I mean, having not played part 2, maybe you're right, and that was them listening to the fans going, no, rubber chicken, pulley, octopus on the face. And
they really... There's some puzzles in the second half that are impossibly hard, and and they deliver, and they're like, it's not just that it's impossibly hard. They managed to go, and we have the technology to make it so that we can randomize the puzzles, so you can't use a guide. And it's like, thank you so much.
Recapture those the joy of those long Sunday afternoons, just clicking on the same background brick, believing, no, this time this will be it. Yeah, no, and it's. I think there is a certain element of that. But I suppose my answer to that would be, looking back here from the year 2021, for Tiz, looking back this way, I go, I absolutely love that there's an explosion-heavy biker rock point-and-click adventure game. Simply because if you want a tough, surly, gravelly voiced protagonist in an action game, one that you can ride a motorcycle in, there's fucking 10 million of them. And I think that's fine and good, and I'm sure they're great. But to me, who kind of likes the methodical slowness and the atmosphere, getting to sort of relish, point-and-click adventures are almost like those, on some level, those sort of synthwave compilations you get on YouTube, where there's just someone standing at a window in an infinite loop smoking a cigarette, and there's just sort of slightly rotating animated elements in the background. I think, you can trace a very direct line from adventure games to those videos, because there is something so soothing about that, having some visual kind of pleasure like that while clicking around whatever else you're doing, answering emails, whatever else it is. But it's just that in this case, what you're doing is advancing a story and trying to solve puzzles and get the belt buckle off of the stall holder's belt as well.
Yeah, you've kind of devolved it from, this is a rough and tumble fun game about being a biker, to it's kind of like a video you put on in the background while you check email. Like, that's the problem, I think, with the game, because you said it's a game where you play as a gruff biker gang, and then you end the sentence with in a point-and-click adventure, and it's like, that doesn't click. This jigsaw pieces don't fit together.
Hey, not only does it click, but it points as well.
Well, well done.
There you go.
I think this is the thing. You mentioned earlier they wanted to get away from the wimpy protagonists, the sort of people who rely on their wits rather than their brawn as a way of solving it. Except that was an inherent reason that it was a point-and-click game in the first place, because you're not playing as someone who can punch his way out of problems, so you have to use your wits. How do you demonstrate that? point and click is like a way that you like relate to the character because the gameplay matches up with the way that they interact with the world. Full Throttle gives you all of the tools of someone who uses their wits to solve problem and gives you a protagonist with fewer wits. Like,
but that's
it's the wrong way to interact.
Because I think that you know, it's not a binary choice. You know, it's not that you go, I either need to have a physically weedy brain solving these problems, or I need a big brawny protagonist. I think what you're faced with is more like a kind of a sort of like an old-fashioned Western where there are sort of problems to get around, people to manipulate, but then there's also a big blow up at the end. You know, there's also a gunfight. You know, I think
well,
that
yeah.
This is why I think the game works, is because you take that attitude of, because also Ben is a vulnerable character. You know, it's you get the feeling that, you know, if he barged into a room full of guys with guns, he'd be shot to death. You know, which is why he has to flee from a police helicopter. So he isn't the invulnerable. You know, he's not Doom Guy. He is a point-and-click protagonist.
True. That's true.
He's just got a gravelier voice and a big chest. You know, he lives in a different, rougher world. And I think for me that stuff all works. I think it's all very consistent. But I agree that like it's very strange to look back and go, this is the cover of the game. Guess what genre it is? You know, it's very incongruous looking back from today. But that said, I think that's one thing I like about point-and-click adventures is that you do get quite a broad and sort of, especially now actually, now that we have these hybrid games. I've been playing 2064 Read-Only Memories recently, and that is a fascinating. It's very sort of pixelated. It's most based on Hideo Kojima's Sega 64 game, not Sega CD game Snatcher, more than anything else.
Yeah.
And you play a down on their luck technology journalist who accidentally gets involved in the assassination of like a tech genius. When his adorable robot friend comes to find you and ask for your help because of some plot. And that's an amazing, like now, as people have taken, I mean, maybe this speaks to what you say, which is that, you know, people these days don't want to click on 17 different inventory items over and over again. And I can see why. But like that sense of like prioritizing a world building, character, and like voice acting as well, often in modern games. I think that all those best elements have endured. But crucially, some of those elements are the slightly head-scratching, like, well, hang on, who am I meant to speak to next? Or, you know, where am I meant to put this fish? That stuff, I think, still endures to some extent. But I think you're quite right in that, you know, the level of patience with that stuff has diminished, and the games reflect that. But I think that if you take the modern sort of dialogue-driven or even dating sim format, you know, visual novels, they call them, I guess, like kind of game, you know, your Phoenix Wrights and all these, if you take all of those and then look all the way back to sort of, you know, at late 80s text adventures, I think Full Throttle sits very nicely in there as a sort of a genre that had reached its kind of a pinnacle of you know, cult, admittedly, success, and then going, let's play with a different sort of palette within this genre. And I just think it stands out really well as an example of applying this sort of style of cinematography, if you will, to a different genre and a different type of protagonist.
I think it does. Yeah, you're right to say it deserves plaudits in the sense that I think one of the reasons this game has sort of managed to nestle away as a cult hit, despite the fact that it sort of it has this reputation for being the
short
and Full Throttle of this group.
Yeah.
Is that I can think of one other video game right off the top of my head where you play as a biker, which is Days Gone.
Yeah.
Which is an action game and is set in a zombie apocalypse, and you know, it wasn't just enough that you could be a biker; it also had to be zombies.
Yes.
But that is very much an action game, but also it does, like, that's a game where you do meet a lot of interesting characters. There's a lot going on in the world of Days Gone. You don't necessarily solve puzzles in the traditional sense of, you know, put padlock on garage door, but you do solve puzzles of like, okay, I need to get to this location. I need to source fuel to do that. There's a horde of zombies there, so I can either figure out a way to fight them and take them on, or find a way to circumnavigate them. I think the difference is that in a point-and-click adventure, puzzle has solution that is like rigid. It is like a formula. It is the only way to solve this puzzle is with this solution.
Yeah.
I think as game design's gotten better and more, you know, we can build 3D worlds with physics, the best kind of puzzles are the ones that are more based on, here are a set of resources, here is a world in which you have to interact. The way you're going to solve this isn't through that rigid design of puzzles. It's through using what you have to take advantage of the situations you're in. So when you are now interacting in the world like you would if you were actually in the world.
Yes, that's true. That's true. But I also think that speaks again to training your brain to think about things in a certain way. And I think that what you're talking about as well as talking about, hey, you say better game design. I say different. Admittedly, it has to be better because the budgets are far bigger and the pressure's on. But anyway, but also I think there is something that, while of course we talk about brute forcing and having to go through all these options, in a game like Full Throttle, there aren't too many because you're not looking at a fully rendered 3D world, which, for example, if you had an entire, Far Cry scale of world to look through and you made that mistake with the gas cap, not the car, that would be completely unforgivable because, somehow you found the right option nearly out of,
but the thing is
4 million hectares and
a game like Far Cry in a world that's that big wouldn't let you make that mistake.
No, exactly.
It would simply say press this button to take the fuel. It would be like that wouldn't be the thing you're trying to solve in it. It would be like I need to get past a group of enemies or I need to explore an area. Yeah. And I think the thing about Full Throttle is that the level of interaction that you have as a player is there are two things that can happen. You proceed or you fail.
Yeah.
And there's no authorship on the part of the player, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, because obviously we're in a linear story, and that's the point of this game. I'm not trying to say that Full Throttle would be better with multiple endings, although that would be interesting.
That would be interesting.
I'm trying to suggest that, like, you say, you have to wire your brain into, like, okay, how have they designed this? What's the person who's writing this game thinking? And at that point, I'm saying, okay, so we're not playing the game anymore. We're playing how do video game developers think the game. This is now a different interaction. I'm not immersed in this world anymore. I'm not being told a story. I'm playing a game of, if I had this job, what would I make happen?
But I still think that is just a different way of approaching a game. And I think that we are somewhat spoiled by the fact that, there are certain things we can always assume are going to happen in a game these days. For example, in most games, you can go anywhere, regardless of hills being in the way. Whereas I well remember a time when if you played a first-person shooter, you were going down a corridor. It might be a wide corridor at certain points, but it was essentially a corridor. And I think that looking back on a game with such rigid sort of rules, you're looking at a series of, it may as well be sort of, one of those phone games where it's literally just a still frame and you have to find all of the hidden objects. Those are a far, weirdly, much more popular, but a far more rudimentary form of game than this, with no story and no surprises. But it's a similar type of thing, and I think that you have to. If I were to be recommending this to another person other than you, I would say, you're going to have to... Someone who hadn't played a point-and-click game before, I'd say you're going to have to sort of take it at quite a slow pace. Or, if you don't mind blasting through it, just get a guide and just enjoy the story for what it is. But, you have to attune yourself to a sense that really it's a series of dioramas and a series of sort of almost action and comedy scenes that you're building with the bits at hand. And that is a very specific kind of fun. And I think that the thing is, one thing that sets the LucasArts games apart and why they maybe endure as more popularly than, your Sierra or any of your other Infocom or whoever games is that they had the character and they had the genuinely good writing. That if you were finding it tough to get your teeth into the style of gameplay, there was plenty else to enjoy along the journey.
Yeah, and I think there is also this element of... I was going to say, like, is it just the case that if Full Throttle was an animated film, it would probably be as good? And I don't think that's true. I think the fact you have to play through the game does give you a level of attachment to the characters you otherwise wouldn't. I think there isn't... The thing is, the modern evolution of the point-and-click genre, and I don't know how many times I've brought up this company on this podcast, even though they don't exist anymore, is Telltale.
Who you're going to say? Yeah, there we go.
It's Telltale. Telltale picked up... It's not just that Telltale picked up LucasArts' mantle and ran with it. It's that Telltale bought LucasArts properties and literally decided to keep making them.
Yeah.
Like, they made the Monkey Island follow-up and Sam and Max follow-ups.
Yeah.
didn't get around to Full Throttle for whatever reason.
Well, there was going to be a sequel, I don't know if you remember.
Yes, multiple attempts at a sequel.
Yeah. Well, no, there was there were there multiple attempts? Oh no, there were 2 at LucasArts, right? And then LucasArts said no more adventure games. That's right. Yeah. And interestingly, I think that what would have happened is it would have been, because this was a kind of PlayStation 2 era product. I think it would have been. I think it would have been exactly what you're talking about. I think it would have been a lot more like an action game, because all the screenshots that came out at the time, reading them in my PC Gamer magazine, it made it look as though it was a sort of lock-on beat-em-up, like a three-dimensional beat-em-up game, and that it would have been interesting to see. I can't help but worry that it would have felt quite generic, even if they'd done the action really well,
I think the thing that would be different... I think... So Full Throttle, I think, is ahead of its time, but not in the... I mean, some of the technology is ahead of its time. There's some 3D models in the game which, for its era, are impressive, and it's really cool. I mean, I was switching between the original graphics and the new graphics in the remaster, because it was something I was very curious about. And I was actually surprised by... Maybe it's just because I got the impression of what it was supposed to, like the fully coloured, fully nice, smoothly animated. And then I'd press F1 and I'd go, oh, that's really close, actually, to what they've remastered. Like, it actually isn't... They've done an amazing job with the resources they have.
This is an interesting question as well with the remaster, because, as you say, like in most of these games, you can switch with a button press between the... You can do that with Halo 1 as well, I found out, which is
the Halo 1 remaster. Well, that's a famously strange remaster, that one, because you can switch between those two graphics, except those two worlds aren't actually the same, and in the remaster, there are, like, walls that become invisible because they didn't create the assets one-to-one.
Probably for good reason, because they learned how to design the levels better, or short of time.
It's a very strange remaster. Anyway, the point I was trying to make about the point I was trying to make about the Full Throttle being ahead of its time is that I think it's an idea for a game that's ahead of its time. I don't think in 1995 the version of Full Throttle that I'm now playing in 2021, I'm going, you could make this game a lot better. You could make the action sequences a lot better. There's ways that you could streamline some of the more ridiculous mechanics. I think how in Grim Fandango you actually walk around the environment?
Yes.
If this game was made now, you would walk around the environment.
Oh, absolutely.
You would have direct joystick control, and you'd have a kick button and a punch button, and maybe you're still solving puzzles in much the same way. But it's like, you boiled the controls down to 4 verbs. There's 4 buttons on a controller.
Yeah, true.
It's true. Just, all of it would become so much more direct and so much more workable. Except in 1995, you probably can't make that game.
No, like you technologically. Can't... Well, certainly like a company which had relatively, compared to other studios, probably fairly small budgets, making Full Throttle, it looks like they squeezed every possible penny they could out of it,
Oh, yeah.
And I don't think they were cash poor. But at the same time, adventure games, as we've already said, never made the most money. So I expect they were not given the same budget as, say, TIE Fighter, which came out the same year and had fully 3D rendered action sequences and space battles and things. Like I think that's they were the runts of the litter in that respect. I mean, I'm speculating, but But I think I see your point. I think what I like about this, and what I like about point-and-click adventures in general, is that the temptation to, when you have an engine that allows you easily, rapidly repeatable gameplay loops of fights in bars or whatever, I think the temptation is so much to pad the game with that, or to assume that's the part of the game people are going to be most interested in. And if you had Tim Schaeffer, Psychonauts 2 is coming out today, apparently. So we may have a very good example of just what he does with AAA technology and, not AAA, but next-gen game technology.
I think AAA. I think
it probably does count as AAA now, does it? Well, it's owned by Microsoft, so I suppose so.
I think, to my mind, he has made... Now that Psychonauts 2 has come out, he's made 3 games I would say are AAA games, and he's made Psychonauts, Brutal Legend, and now Psychonauts 2.
I imagine he'd say something witty if you said that to him about not getting paid enough, but I can't think of anything as witty right now.
But I think a good example of where game design has gone is that in this game, you can click on a bunch of things and say punch television that is 20 foot above you, and the character goes, I can't do that. Whereas now, you just know you couldn't do that. And the dialogue line of "I can't do that" just doesn't exist now, because the way that we interact with games is you are either doing it or you are not doing it. We don't have to have this. this is that disconnect. This is the idea of telling a character, "Hey, can you lick the barman?" And he's going like, I don't want. Like, the famous line in this game is, "I'm not putting my mouth on that.
I'm not putting my lips on that." Yeah,
I'm not putting my lips on that. That's it. And that's the thing now, is in games now, you just don't have the option to ask him to put lips on things, because that's just not how people interact in the world.
And it's a poorer world for it. It's the best game you've ever played. It's completely, it's a weird thing, isn't it? It's like being a weird cult loving adventure games, because, like you say, like the time when most people and their mum got into computer games was at a time when, well, it is polarized, isn't it? Because I suppose that's what the point I'm making in a way, which is the modern day version of Full Throttle would either be almost all fighting with occasional cutscenes, or it would be doubling down on it and having even fewer bike action sequences to be even truer to the kind of pure story thing. You know, it could be a visual novel. It could just be meeting a series of scuzzballs in, you know, dirty towns and dive bars, you know, and just having the story told that way with way less interaction. But I think for me personally, and my kind of taste, there is a sweet spot around these adventure games where you have that sort of that illusion of freedom of being able to go wherever you want, talk to whoever you want, in whatever order you want. But at the same time, you know, there's quite a linear path through it. You are going to see the end of the story. You are going to find out what happens to this person. You're going to get to the next sequence and have a shock and a twist, and then have to deal with that as a character, both in practical puzzle terms and, you know, emotionally in terms of the storyline, whenever you next regain control of the character. And I think that I see what you mean entirely. I think that if you gave Tim Schaeffer the chance at Full Throttle 2 now, I'll say this, I think he'd do a flipping brilliant game, because he's as you say, he doesn't seem to have let up. And I would be fascinated to see if you took modern technology and the freedom and responsiveness of modern controls and modern graphics and put Full Throttle in that world. I think it would be fascinating to see how that balance is retained. But if there's anyone who could do it, it is amazingly still Tim Schaeffer.
Probably still Tim Schaeffer.
Yeah.
I mean, you mentioned earlier, you said cowboy as a genre for point and click. And as soon as you said that, I went, that's actually a brilliant fit, because despite their reputation, actually most Westerns are talking to people, trying to reason them round. Like, actually, it's kind of one of the things that I really love about Red Dead Redemption, is that so much of what actually I love about that game is like the pathos of the various stories, and like there's shootouts, there's horse riding and stuff, but it's a much more thoughtful game than I would have thought Rockstar were capable of, based off the reputation of Grand Theft Auto.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
A series that is, as far as I'm concerned, like what McDonald's is to haute cuisine, Grand Theft Auto is to satire. Like it's
like a sledgehammer in the face, isn't it? Like, I really enjoyed GTA 5, but yeah, I mean, they're doubling down over and over again on, just on the.
They love being crass, and they're good at it. I don't want to begrudge them that. I don't want to say like, and therefore they're less worthy. No, they're really good at crass. It's just I didn't expect them to come out with something as like really nice and beautiful as Red Dead Redemption. But that's what I think Full Throttle would be. Not necessarily all the open worldness of it, but like this idea that you would actually get to be in the environment on your motorcycle. You would go and talk to people. You would solve puzzles. You can still have all of that. It's just now you actually get to do the thing rather than sort of ask them, can you kick that? No. Okay. Can you look at that? It's a can. Thank you.
So it sounds like what you're saying to me, just to sort of round things off here in this discussion, is that you absolutely adored the world and all the characters, and you loved interacting with them. And if anything, you'd love to see a new second game in the series designed by Tim Schaeffer with all the advantages of modern technology, which to me sounds like this was probably the best game you've never played.
Well, here's the thing, Tom. I've been saving this to the end because it's absolutely the thing that there's no point having an argument over on the basis that it is completely personal taste. But I'll rip this Band-Aid off now. This game isn't that funny. The plot's not particularly that interesting. And much as the voice cast are doing a wonderful job, the characters are a bit flat. So it's not the best game that I've never played.
This is the thing that you have said that I the most disagree with of this entire conversation. And I don't have time to unpick why.
It's kind of a pointless argument. Basically, the main thing I was going to say is it feels weird to play a bike game whereby the entire plot of it is we need to save this massive corporation. I'm like, is that the message that this is about? Really? You're an outsider, you're above the law?
That's very 90s, I think, as well, because it is the idea of sort of preserving a sort of an honest company that stands for something in the face of a sort of globalized and sort of overly merchandised thing. I mean, I tell you, like, you kind of have to... I did think it was funny going back to it, because I'd forgotten all about the sort of Lost Princess storyline and about the fact that ultimately what you're trying to do is protect the corporate interests of a motorcycle company. But I loved it just for moments where, like, a dying man is grasping your lapel and saying, "You've got to stop him! He's going to start making minivans!" And I just think that it totally sells itself to me. I really love the characters. As you say, the voice cast are tremendous. Half the supporting cast of Futurama are in this game.
Yeah, Mark Hamill plays the villain.
Yeah,
and
Mark Hamill.
It's a very arch villain. He's not a particularly deep character.
He's not layered.
But
he's not a layered
He's
character.
very fun.
He is great fun.
I think as well, my problem with the plot is that it's kind of a game with a central mystery that's revealed relatively quickly, and so the rest of it is just like it's a race against time plot, which contradicts point and click adventure because you can take as much time as you want.
Yet again, I think we come down to, like, can you attune your brain to the point and click storytelling and the kind of point and click style of storytelling? Whereas, of course, well, I don't know. I mean, not that many games have mysteries in them, do they? Like, when you think about it now, like, usually I mean, you take something like Far Cry, it's you're aggrieved at somebody and you have to then fight your way across the map and then go get them. But, there are games, obviously, and like puzzle games and story-driven, like narrative games now that pull off those kinds of mysteries very, very well. But but it is, to my mind, I think it takes those things and explores them really, really well. And I also, I think the mystery is the ride. The ride, finding out the key mystery you're talking about so early, it did surprise me how early it is. But my memory of it from playing it the first time round was that was a big twist. And again, maybe that was because I spent quite a few lazy afternoons clicking around screens before I found that out. And maybe it didn't seem quite as abrupt an experience as it does now today, with the high benefit of having to get through these things quickly.
being able to know how to solve things. But anyway, it's been a lot of fun having you on. Hey, I'll tell you what I do find really funny, Tom.
Oh yeah.
Is I find your podcast really funny. Why don't you tell everybody about that?
Oh, well, that's very kind of you, Lewis. Thank you. If you either love or hate the humour and character development of Full Throttle, you might enjoy my one-man sketch and character comedy podcast, Crowley Time, which I do at immense personal expense of time and energy for relatively little financial reward. And I'm very, very proud of it. I think it's the thing I've worked the longest and hardest on in my entire life. And it says a lot about me, I think, that it's a collection, kind of a loose assortment of incredibly puerile characters and comedy scenes. So it's my own sketch show, and I got it the only way I could, by making the entire thing myself. Most of the music is me, the editing's all me, all the writing is me, every character, bar a few little spin-offs, is me. And it's a sketch thing, so you can just dip in wherever you want, start at the beginning if you want, or listen to the most recent one. It doesn't really matter. And I tried to design it so that you could pretty much jump on wherever you want. So pick the episode title that you like the best.
And I think it's worth really pointing out to everyone listening as well, like, so many podcasts are like this one in that they are a chat.
Yeah.
They're just a chat between people about things. What you have made is a legitimate show. It's the kind of thing... Well, no, it's something to be really admired, because I previously made a podcast that was like a series of 5 radio monologue dramas, and it was so time-consuming to produce it.
A lot of work.
Particularly compared to something that's just a chat.
Yep.
Like,
when you only have to do any editing if someone says something that's, like, monstrously offensive, and you go, I'm not putting that in.
Just cutting out chuffs and buffs. It's anything, to actually sit down. To the fact is, the level of production that goes into this show that we're doing right now is I have to play a video game, make notes, and then talk to someone about it.
Yep.
I know for a fact that writing something takes twice as long as this process.
I think twice is a very generous way to put it. It's a lot of work, but it is. I think it's my natural inclination to make things hard on myself, which might be why I enjoy point and click adventure games so much. I'm so pleased you like it, and I'm glad you've recognised how much work it is. But it's a thing. It's I think the thing I've loved. I've written on things. I've put plays and things together. I've performed in a comedy group for many years. I think that just quietly, insanely making Crowley Time by myself like a mad little tinker is the happiest I have been, I think, in my professional life. And thank God, like, quite a lot of people have heard it and have told me how much they like it. And it really is, it's that thing, isn't it, where you give something that is 100% yourself to the world, and every time somebody likes it even a bit, you go, oh, thank God. Because if you hated
it's
this...
It's not just me.
Yeah,
it's not...
If you hated this, you hate me personally.
No, it is a fantastic show.
Oh,
and I really, if you're listening to this, please go and listen to Crowley Time, because I promise you it's many magnitudes...
more elaborate than this show.
More elaborate and better produced and all of these other things. So I really, really recommend it. And hey, it's made by a guy who really loves the work of Tim Schaeffer. So we definitely know you've got a good sense of humour.
That's right. I'm selling these fine leather jackets.
Thanks very much for coming on, Tom.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me, Lewis.
Well, that was Tom there with Full Throttle. Sadly, not the best video game I've never played, but a game I'm really glad to have crossed off my list and learned more about. Tom put up a very passionate and I think full-hearted defense of the game there, but sadly didn't quite convince me it was the best video game I've never played. Hey, we already mentioned it, but you definitely should go and check out Crowley Time. It's a brilliant, really funny show. I did listen to the most recent episode that he'd put up with Rufus Hound, in which he investigates the Krat family line, which is a brilliant, very funny series of sketches all cobbled together with a through-line story, so it's definitely worth checking out. Just give it a Google. Crowley Time, search for it where you find podcasts. He's got incredible reviews all over iTunes, which clearly shows that he is at the very least very popular with the general public, which I think is inarguable when you listen to what he's done. It's really funny, it's really good. If you like this show, you can also review it on iTunes, on Apple Podcasts. It's all over Google, Spotify, YouTube. Go find it. Go find this podcast. Go find Tom's podcast. Share it about, have a little chat. You can follow this show on Twitter, @GameNeverPlayed. And of course, if you haven't heard it already, Any Suggestions Doctor, the improvised Doctor Who parody, a show that I am a part of, is going on tour. It's touring around England. Go to anysuggestionsimprov.co.uk to find out more. It's a very fun, silly parody of Doctor Who, so if that sounds like your sort of thing, what are you waiting for? This might be your last chance. Probably isn't, actually. We're going to go around again. But it could be. Thanks very much for listening. Stay safe.